Welcome back to my channel, where we uncover the forgotten corners of the past. Today, I'm taking you into a story about the mysterious case of the Kentucky twins that you might have never heard before. A mystery buried in the dust of time, a truth that will send shivers down your spine. But before we embark on this journey, take a moment to let me know, where are you listening to this story from? That helps me understand how far these secrets have traveled. And if this story truly captivates you, if it makes you ponder, don't hesitate to give me a like and subscribe to the channel to keep me going. Together, we'll explore the darkest pages of history, and you won't want to miss a thing. There are photographs that should not exist. Some are lost to time, others deliberately destroyed. But a few, just a few, linger in the shadows, waiting to be found. Imagine, for a moment, the faded edges of a sepia-toned print, unearthed from the bottom of a warped metal drawer in a long-abandoned courthouse basement. Two barefoot boys stand before a collapsing cabin. Their faces are nearly identical, yet not quite, one jaw slightly askew, an eye set lower than its twin. The image is simple, almost mundane, but the longer one looks, the more the mind recoils. It is as if the camera has captured not a moment, but a mistake, a duplication gone wrong. No one remembers taking the photograph of... no one claims to have seen the boys. And yet, the picture persists, a silent witness to a story that refuses to be buried. In the hush that follows the discovery, questions bloom like mold in the damp Kentucky air. Who were these children? Why do their faces echo each other so precisely, yet so imperfectly? And what happened in the woods beyond the reach of any map, where the land itself seems to hold its breath? The answers, if they exist, are tangled in decades of silence, in church ledgers with names struck through, and in reports that vanish as quickly as they are filed. The story does not begin with a crime, nor with a confession, but with a presence, a sense that something is watching from the tree line, waiting for the right moment to step into the light. To understand how such a photograph could come to be, one must first step into the world that shaped it. Appalachia, in the first half of the 20th century, was a land both beautiful and unforgiving. The hills rolled on for miles, their slopes thick with laurel and fog, their hollows carved by generations who knew the value of silence. Roads twisted and disappeared into the undergrowth. The sun itself seemed reluctant to linger in the valleys. Here, isolation was not merely a fact of geography, but a way of life. Families clung to their land and to each other, wary of outsiders, suspicious of change. The past was not forgotten, but folded into the present, whispered from porch to porch in the hush of dusk. Records from the era indicate that Leslie County, Kentucky, was a place where the boundaries between memory and myth blurred easily. Census logs trailed off into nothing. Property deeds changed hands in the dark, and the names of the dead were sometimes left uncarved on stone. The church was the only authority that mattered, and even its reach faded at the edge of the timberline. According to oral histories collected by Dr. Helen Worthing in the 1970s, the people of Hollow Ridge spoke little of their neighbors and less of themselves. "We keep to our own," one elderly resident told her, "and the woods keep the rest." It was in this landscape, dense, secretive, and heavy with the weight of unspoken things, that the Merryweather family made their home, their cabin, a one-room structure slumping into the earth, stood at the end of a path that no longer appears on any map. The spring that once fed it ran dry every third summer, and the roof sagged beneath the burden of too many winters. Yet the taxes were always paid, in exact change, by a woman who rarely spoke and never lingered in town. Her name was Lila May Merryweather, and she was, by all accounts, a figure both familiar and unknowable. Lila's story, like the land itself, is layered with contradiction. Born in 1889, the third of 6 children, she inherited the cabin after her mother's death, a modest legacy, but one she guarded fiercely. The last official record of her life in public is a property transaction dated 1906. After that, she recedes into the margins, a name struck from the church rolls in 1923 for moral unfitness. A rumor whispered behind closed doors about a brother who vanished after a long illness. A face glimpsed at the edge of a funeral procession and then never seen again. The community, for its part, responded with the only weapon it had: silence. Lila was neither shunned nor embraced. She was simply left alone. Her presence acknowledged only in the careful avoidance of her name. Yet the land remembers what people choose to forget. Hunters spoke of dogs that refused to follow scent into the laurel thickets near her cabin. Children dared each other to run past the old fence line, but none lingered. The trees, it was said, grew too still in that hollow, as if listening for footsteps that never came. And then, in the late 1930s, the sightings began. 2 boys, pale and lean, always together, always silent, gathering kindling at the edge of the woods. They did not answer when called. They did not play with other children. They moved in perfect unison, as if bound by a rhythm no one else could hear. The first to notice was Edward Tullis, a retired mail carrier whose route took him past Hollow Ridge twice a week. In an interview recorded in 1969, Tullis recalled the unease that settled over him each time he glimpsed the boys at the tree line. They weren't twins. Not really, he said, but they matched like someone tried to make one copy from the other, and the ink ran out halfway. His words, preserved on brittle tape, carried the weight of a man who has seen too much and understood too little. Others, too, began to speak quietly, and only when pressed to the children who watched but did not see, who stood in the rain without shivering, who left no footprints in the mud. Inside the Merryweather cabin, the rules were different. There were no mirrors, not even polished metal. Every surface that might hold a reflection was covered or removed. Meals were eaten in silence. 3 chipped tin plates passed from hand to hand, the boys waiting for Lila to chew before they began. She called them my echoes, never by name, and in her personal effects, scraps of cloth, fragments of hymns rewritten in looping cursive, the plural pronouns multiplied. We rise, we fall, we echo. The phrase appears again and again, as if repetition could conjure meaning from the void. Beneath the iron bed where the boys slept, someone, perhaps one of them, perhaps both, had carved a message into the wood, the letters uneven and doubled back over themselves. My brother cries with no sound. We shared the same night. I was born too late. The handwriting is crude, the words haunting in their simplicity. Forensic specialists who later examined the markings remarked on the coordination, as if the writing was done with one hand but 2 minds. The townspeople, for their part, kept their distance. No birth certificates were ever filed, no school-enrolled boys matching their description. The midwife denied ever delivering twins to the Merryweather cabin. Yet the sightings continued, and the stories grew. Some said the boys were not Lila's kin at all, but orphans she had taken in out of pity. Others whispered of a curse, of bloodlines turned inward. of a family that had made a promise to itself and to the land. The truth, as always, lay somewhere in the shadows, just out of reach. In the end, it is the silence that endures, the silence of the woods, the silence of the records, the silence of two boys who moved as one. And in that silence, the story waits unfinished, unresolved, echoing through the years like footsteps on a path that leads only deeper into the dark. But the silence is not empty. It is filled with the weight of generations, with the hush of secrets kept too long, with the soft, persistent thrum of questions that refuse to die. The land itself seems to conspire in the concealment, swallowing up evidence, blurring the edges of memory. The fog that settles over Hollow Ridge each morning isn't merely a trick of the weather, but a veil drawn over the past, obscuring what should be seen, protecting what should not. The Merryweather cabin, once a modest shelter, became a fortress of solitude. Its windows were covered from the inside with heavy burlap, nailed tight against the frame, so that even the faintest glimmer of sunlight struggled to enter. The porch sagged under the weight of years, its boards warped and splintered, the steps uneven and treacherous. No flowers grew in the yard, no chickens scratched in the dust. The only signs of life were the two boys, moving in tandem, their shadows flickering across the threshold like the hands of a broken clock. Lila herself was a figure of contradiction. To the rare visitor, she appeared composed, her hair pulled back in a severe braid, her eyes sharp and unyielding. She spoke little, and when she did, her words were measured, as if each syllable cost her dearly. Yet there was a gentleness in the way she touched the boy's shoulders, a carefulness in the way she set the table, a ritualistic precision that suggested both love and fear. According to a now-lost WPA field notebook from 1940, a social worker described the atmosphere inside the cabin as thick with expectation, as if every movement was being watched, every word weighed and found wanting. The boys themselves were a study in contrasts. At first glance, they seemed interchangeable, same height, same build, same shock of pale hair falling over their foreheads. But a closer look revealed subtle differences, a scar above one eyebrow, a hesitation in the way one reached for a cup, a flicker of confusion in the other's gaze. They rarely spoke, and when they did, their voices overlapped, echoing each other's words in a way that unsettled even the most hardened observer. They moved with an eerie synchronicity, their gestures mirroring Lila's own, as if they were not merely imitating her, but channeling her will. The community's response was a mixture of fear and fascination. Some avoided the Merryweather property altogether, crossing themselves as they passed the overgrown path that led to the cabin. Others watched from a distance, inventing stories to fill the void left by ignorance. There were whispers of strange lights at night, of chanting heard through the trees, of animals found dead at the edge of the property. Yet no one intervened. The sheriff, when pressed, shrugged and said there was nothing to be done. People have a right to be left alone, he told a reporter from the Leslie Ledger in 1947, especially folks who wanted that way. Still, the questions persisted. Why did Lila withdraw so completely from the world? What happened to her brother Samuel, whose name vanished from the records after a long illness? Why were there no birth certificates, no school records, no trace of the boys outside the narrow confines of Hollow Ridge. The answers, if they existed, were locked away behind the cabin's nailed-shut windows, buried beneath layers of ritual and routine. Occasionally, a stranger would stumble upon the edge of the Merryweather land, a lost hiker, a traveling merchant, a census taker determined to complete his rounds. Each encounter added another thread to the tapestry of rumor. One merchant, Howard Kittner, wrote in a letter to the Kentucky State Welfare Office in 1949, "I am writing not because of injury or neglect in the physical sense, but because no child should look that empty. Their expressions were blank. Their movements were absent. They weren't dirty. They weren't bruised. Just hollow. That's worse." The letter was filed and forgotten, joining a stack of unreviewed reports in a box marked non-urgent. Remote claims. Inside the cabin, the rituals continued. No mirrors, no names, no laughter. The boys waited for Lila to begin each meal, copying her every movement with mechanical precision. At night, they lay side by side, their hands clasped together, their breathing synchronized. Sometimes, in the darkness, one would begin to cry, soft, soundless sobs that seemed to vibrate through the floorboards. Leela would sit at the edge of the bed, her silhouette framed by the faint glow of a lantern, and hum a lullaby in a language no one else remembered. The walls of the cabin were lined with portraits, family photographs, their faces scratched out or turned to the wall, as if the past itself was too dangerous to look upon. In a cedar chest, a visitor might find scraps of cloth inked with strange symbols, fragments of hymns rewritten to include plural pronouns, and a Bible with entire sections removed and replaced with handwritten phrases in a mix of Gaelic and English. Above the boy's bed, carved into the wooden beam, were the words Shana Anam's same soul. The effect was one of profound unease, a sense that the boundaries between self and other, between past and present, between love and fear, had been blurred beyond recognition. The Merryweather cabin was not merely a home, but a world unto itself, a world governed by rules that made sense only to those who lived within its walls. And so, the story lingers, suspended between fact and folklore, between what can be proven and what must be believed. The photograph remains, a silent testament to a mystery that refuses to be solved. The woods grow thicker, the path fades, but the echoes persist soft, insistent, impossible to ignore. In the end, it is not the answers that haunt, but the questions. Who were the boys in the photograph? What did they see, standing side by side in the shadow of a collapsing cabin? And what, if anything, did they leave behind for those willing to look? In the silence of Hollow Ridge, the past is never truly past. It waits, patient and unblinking, for someone to ask the right question, to see what others have missed, to listen for the echo that lingers long after the last voice has fallen silent. A single event, seemingly insignificant at first, can shift the course of a story forever. It began with a silence broken not by words, but by the absence of them. One morning, a church ledger was quietly amended. A name, once inscribed in careful script, was struck through with a single deliberate line. No explanation was offered, only a note in the margin, stricken from the rolls on grounds of moral unfitness. The ink had barely dried before the whispers began to coil through the town, winding their way from the pews to the porches, from the market stalls to the schoolyard gates. No one spoke openly, but everyone listened. The air itself seemed to thicken with speculation, suspicion, and a peculiar kind of dread. It was not the first time a name had vanished from the records, nor would it be the last. But this time, the absence was different. It was as if a thread had been pulled from the fabric of the community, leaving a gap that could not be mended. The townspeople, already wary of what they did not understand, found themselves glancing over their shoulders more often, locking the doors a little earlier, and crossing the street to avoid certain houses after dark. The sense of unease grew, fed by rumors that multiplied in the shadows. Some claimed to have seen strange figures moving at the edge of the woods, always in pairs, always silent. Others spoke of lights flickering in the windows long after midnight, of voices carried on the wind that did not belong to any living soul. According to a now lost field notebook from the Works Progress Administration, a local midwife was once asked about the children rumored to live in the old cabin. She shook her head, her hands trembling as she folded a piece of cloth. No birth, no record, no kin, she whispered, as if afraid the walls themselves might be listening. The interviewer, a young woman from Louisville, noted the way the midwife's eyes darted to the window, as if expecting to see someone or something watching from the darkness beyond. The first tangible sign that something was amiss came in the form of a photograph, discovered by accident during a flood cleanup at the county courthouse. The image, faded and curled at the edges, showed two barefoot boys standing before a collapsing cabin. Their faces, nearly identical, were marked by subtle differences, a jaw misaligned, an eye set lower than its twin. The photograph was logged without incident, filed away with a generic label, unknown children, possible homestead case. Yet those who handled it reported a sense of unease, as if the image itself was a trespass, an intrusion into a world that did not wish to be seen. As the years passed, the stories grew more elaborate. Hunters spoke of dogs that refused to follow scent into the laurel thickets near the cabin. Children dared each other to run past the old fence line, but none lingered. The trees, it was said, grew too still in that hollow, as if listening for footsteps that never came. The sense of being watched became a constant companion for those who ventured too close. Some described the feeling as a weight pressing down on their chests, making it hard to breathe. Others spoke of a chill that seeped into their bones, a cold that no fire could chase away. The tension in the community reached a breaking point when a traveling merchant, Howard Kittner, wrote a letter to the Kentucky State Welfare Office. He described seeing two boys on the porch of a collapsing cabin, their expressions blank, their movements absent. They weren't dirty, they weren't bruised, just hollow. That's worse. The letter was filed and forgotten, joining a stack of unreviewed reports in a box marked non-urgent remote claims. But the story did not fade. Instead, it took root, growing in the fertile soil of fear and uncertainty. Inside the cabin, life followed a set of rules that seemed designed to ward off the outside world. There were no mirrors, not even polished metal. Every surface that might hold a reflection was covered or removed. Meals were eaten in silence. 3 chipped tin plates passed from hand to hand, the boys waiting for the woman to chew before they began. She called them my echoes, never by name, and in her personal effects scraps of cloth, fragments of hymns rewritten in looping cursive, the plural pronouns multiplied. We rise, we fall, we echo. The phrase appeared again and again, as if repetition could conjure meaning from the void. Beneath the iron bed where the boys slept, someone, perhaps one of them, Perhaps both had carved a message into the wood, the letters uneven and doubled back over themselves. My brother cries with no sound. We share the same night. I was born too late. The handwriting was crude, the words haunting in their simplicity. Forensic specialists who later examined the markings remarked on the coordination, as if the writing was done with one hand but two minds. The pressure inside the cabin was matched only by the tension outside. The community, already on edge, began to fracture under the strain. Old alliances crumbled, and new ones formed in the shadows. Some argued that the family should be left alone, that their suffering was punishment enough. Others demanded action, insisting that the presence of the boys was a blight on the land, a curse that threatened to spread. The sheriff, caught between duty and fear, did nothing. The church, once a source of comfort, became a place of whispered prayers and furtive glances. As the seasons turned, the sense of unease deepened. The boys, always together, seemed to grow older without changing. Their faces remained eerily similar, their movements synchronized, their voices overlapping in a way that unsettled even the most hardened observer. They did not attend school. They did not play with other children. They existed in a world apart, governed by rules that made sense only to those who lived within its walls. The first real crack in the facade came when a social worker, Evelyn Cross, was assigned to investigate the family as part of a post-war outreach program. Her journal, later recovered under mysterious circumstances, offers a rare glimpse into the world behind the cabin's nailed-shut windows. "There's something wrong with their mouths," she wrote. "They move like they're learning to be human. One copies the other before speaking. I asked about their mother. They both pointed at the same tree. No words, just pointed." The entries grew shorter, more frantic. As the days passed, "Their lungs don't breathe right. It's not wheezing. It's like timing, like one waits for the other. They hold hands in their sleep. I am the only one who blinks." The final entry, scrawled in a trembling hand, read, "We breathe together." Evelyn Cross was never seen again. Her disappearance was quietly filed as a presumed accident in wilderness terrain. The official statement from the Department of Family Services blamed poor road conditions and lack of communication infrastructure. But privately, several field officers expressed concern. One noted that her assigned driver refused to take future jobs in the county and left the program entirely. The loss of the social worker sent shockwaves through the community. Some saw it as proof that the family was cursed, that their presence brought only misfortune. Others whispered that she had gotten too close to the truth, that she had seen something she was not meant to see. The sheriff, when pressed, offered only a shrug and a muttered prayer. The church held a service for the missing, but attendance was sparse. Fear, it seemed, had become the dominant faith. It was around this time that a new figure entered the story, a man named Marshall Greaves, a retired psychiatrist from Ohio. He arrived quietly, renting a small cabin on the outskirts of town, unbeknownst to the locals. He had been privately investigating the disappearance of Evelyn Cross, a former student of his during her time at Berea College. His arrival was no accident. He came not for peace, but for answers. Graves began where the records ended, in the archive rooms of Leslie and Perry counties. He spent months combing through tax rolls, baptismal logs, and handwritten census supplements, searching for evidence of the family Evelyn had been sent to visit. What he found disturbed him. Entire branches of the Merryweather family, particularly from the years 1890 to 1920, seemed to vanish from public record after 1912. Births were logged, but deaths were not. Marriages disappeared mid-lineage. In one 1908 county registry, he found a list of 6 Merryweather children living at a now-defunct homestead. By 1915, the same names had been crossed out with no corresponding burial or migration notes. As Greaves tracked the family further, a disturbing pattern emerged. Inheritance documents, land transfers, even literacy records began to show overlapping names, uncles becoming fathers, cousins listed as siblings. The same surnames repeating in tighter and tighter loops. In a marginal note in his research journal, Gravers wrote, "Not a family tree, but a spiral." The blood turned inward. By 1974, he had compiled over 200 pages of notes, genealogical charts, and transcribed interviews with aging locals. One woman, now blind, told him, "They didn't marry out. Never did. They kept to themselves like a promise." Graves grew convinced that the matriarch, long suspected of raising twins in isolation, had not merely inherited a twisted bloodline, she had deliberately preserved it. In a final typed note left on his desk, he wrote, "This wasn't caregiving. It was architecture. She built them." Graves believed the twins Evelyn encountered were not a tragic result of isolation, but the intentional outcome of generational inbreeding crafted over time by a woman who saw genetic purity not as science, but as ritual. He planned to publish. He had enough for a manuscript, enough to name names, enough to demand the state reopen the cross case. But in February of 1979, everything stopped. A neighbor delivering firewood found the front door to Griffiths' cabin wide open. Inside, nothing appeared taken. His notes were stacked neatly on the kitchen table, arranged by chapter, sorted, labeled, and untouched. His tape recorder still had fresh batteries. His reading glasses rested on top of his journal, and placed squarely at the center of the table was a single black and white photograph never seen before. It showed 2 boys, barefoot, standing knee-deep in a creek. Their arms were locked at the elbows, their heads tilted identically toward the lens. Their eyes reflected no light. It was unclear who took the photograph or when. Graves was never seen again. Search teams combed the hills for days. Dogs refused to cross a creek near the old Merryweather plot. No trace was found, not even footprints. His disappearance was ruled inconclusive. His colleagues, once skeptical, grew uneasy. Dr. Leslie Warren, who worked with Greaves at the Columbus State Psychiatric Hospital, later said, "Marshall believed in patterns, not ghosts, not curses. He saw intention where others saw accident. If he vanished, it's because someone decided the pattern was full." His notes were boxed and archived, though many pages are now missing. The photograph was preserved under glass and marked evidence unknown origin. The label has since faded. What remains is a growing consensus among researchers and folklorists alike. Graves did not go too far. He simply got too close. And whatever was built in that hollow, it was never meant to be examined. The story, once whispered in the shadows, now stands at the edge of revelation, its secrets trembling on the verge of being named. The spiral has tightened. The blood has turned inward, and the echo, once faint, now threatens to become a roar. The first undeniable evidence emerged not from rumor, but from the earth itself. In the autumn of 1992, a road crew tasked with cutting a new bypass through the northern ridgeline struck something soft beneath the roots of an ancient oak. The machinery shuddered to a halt. Workers, expecting to find the remains of a deer or perhaps a forgotten well. Instead, uncovered a shallow pit. Within it lay 3 partial skeletons, child-sized, curled as if placed deliberately, their bones arranged in a symmetry that defied coincidence. The skulls were deformed not by violence, but by nature's slow, relentless hand. The jaws, especially, bore a mirrored alignment, teeth overlapping in patterns too precise to be accidental. Forensic reports confirmed that the cranial plates had fused prematurely, a sign of genetic anomaly rather than trauma. The discovery sent a ripple through the county. The bones, stripped of any shroud or marker, were bare, save for a single, faint carving on the smallest jawbone, a looping figure 8, the infinity symbol. Etched so delicately it was nearly invisible. The State Anthropological Unit, dispatched within days, catalogued the remains, noting the absence of clothing, jewelry, or any trace of identity. DNA sequencing, limited at the time, ruled out any match to known missing children. The pit was backfilled, the bones sealed in unmarked boxes, and the site paved over. Yet, among the crew, the story spread a quiet warning about the quiet cut, a stretch of road where no birds sang and no grass grew. But the evidence did not end with the bones. In the county archives, a yellowed envelope surfaced, postmarked 3 days after the fire that had consumed the old cabin. Inside, a single sheet of paper, typewritten and folded twice, bore a message that chilled even the most skeptical investigator. The blood went in circles. The twins were never meant to see the sun. The letter, typed on a Remington Model 5, matched no known correspondence, and no fingerprints were ever recovered. It was quietly filed, then forgotten, until a renovation decades later brought it back to light. Other artifacts began to surface, as if the land itself was unwilling to let the story rest. A pair of children's shoes, immaculately preserved, was found lashed to a wooden cross deep in the mud near the old creek bed. The words, "same blood, same soul, same end," were scorched into the wood with a heated nail. A photograph, never seen before, showed 2 boys standing knee-deep in water, their arms locked at the elbows, their eyes reflecting no light. Each piece, on its own, might have been dismissed as coincidence or the product of local superstition. Together, they formed a pattern, a web of evidence that could not be ignored. Testimony from the period records the growing unease among those who handled these objects. A field technician, years later, would recall the moment he saw the infinity symbol carved into the jawbone. Those kids weren't just deformed. They were copied. Like someone tried to make the same person twice and got it wrong 3 times. The sense of something unnatural, something deliberately engineered, began to take hold. The evidence was no longer just physical. It was psychological, a weight pressing down on all who came too close. As the investigation deepened, the boundaries between fact and confession blurred. Letters, unsigned but consistent in tone and detail, began to arrive at post offices across the region. Each referenced unfinished guardianship, misaligned offspring, and the quiet science of resemblance. The signature was always the same, M. Merryweather. The contents were vague, but the implication was clear. Someone was maintaining the identity, not hiding, but circling, as if bound by ritual. Then came the confession, not in a courtroom, but in the margins of history. A hymn, rewritten in a trembling hand, was found among the personal effects of the matriarch. We rise, we fall, we echo, let no mirror speak. The words, repeated like a mantra, revealed a mind consumed by the need to control, to preserve, to repeat. In a fragment of a diary, a single line stood out. This was not caregiving, it was architecture. I built them. The admission was not of guilt, but of purpose, a declaration that the children were not the product of chance, but of design. The psychological horror of this revelation rippled outward. Those who read the confession spoke of sleepless nights, of dreams haunted by the image of two boys moving in perfect unison, their faces blank, their eyes unblinking. The community, once content to whisper and avert its gaze, now found itself confronted by the scale of what had been done. The matriarch's actions were not the desperate measures of a woman driven mad by isolation, but the calculated steps of someone determined to shape the future in her own image. The full scope of the crime became clear: generations of inbreeding, not as accident, but as ritual. Children born not for love, but for the perpetuation of a bloodline, the deliberate erasure of identity, the suppression of individuality, the creation of echoes rather than heirs. The horror was not in the violence, but in the intention, the cold, methodical pursuit of a legacy that could only end in silence. The legal and social consequences were as profound as the revelations themselves. The county, faced with undeniable evidence, was forced to act. The land was declared abandoned, uninhabitable, and reverted to state ownership. No one came forward to claim it. The trail leading to the old cabin was erased from official maps, the site marked only by a faded sign warning trespassers to keep away. The bones, sealed in government storage, were never re-examined. Their case files marked indeterminate historic remains. In the community, the aftermath was quieter, but no less devastating. Families who had once whispered about the Merryweathers now found themselves questioning their own histories, their own silences. The church, which had once struck a name from its rolls and turned away, now faced dwindling attendance and a crisis of faith. The sheriff's office, long content to file reports and forget them, was forced to confront its own complicity in the years of neglect. Yet, for all the official actions, the true reckoning came in the private moments at kitchen tables, in the hush of evening, in the eyes of children who asked questions their parents could not answer. The contrast between the past and the present, between the lies that had been told and the truth that had been revealed, was stark. The community, once bound by silence, now found itself fractured by knowledge. The story did not end with justice, nor with closure. The land remained scarred, the echoes persistent, the evidence undeniable and unyielding had forced the truth into the open. But the cost was measured not in verdicts or sentences, but in the uneasy quiet that settled over the hills, in the knowledge that some wounds do not heal, and some legacies cannot be undone. The spiral, once hidden, now lay exposed, a warning, a lesson, and a burden for those who remained. The collapse was not sudden, but it was absolute. In the months that followed, the exposure of the truth, the landscape itself seemed to recoil. The old paths that once led to the Merryweather land faded beneath a tangle of brambles and wild grass, as if the earth was eager to erase the memory of what had transpired. The community, once bound by a silent pact of avoidance, now found itself fractured by knowledge. The air, once thick with rumor, grew heavier with the weight of what could no longer be denied. Official records state that the property was declared uninhabitable, the deeds reverting to the county, the boundaries redrawn on maps as if to cauterize a wound. The cabin, or what little remained of it, was left to rot, its timbers collapsing inward, the roof caving under the burden of years and secrets. No one came to claim the land. No one sought to rebuild. The silence that settled over the hollow was different now. No longer the hush of complicity, but the emptiness of abandonment. Yet the collapse was not confined to the land alone. The community's sense of self unraveled, thread by thread. Families who had once whispered about the Merryweathers now found themselves questioning the stories they had told their own children, the silences they had maintained, the boundaries they had drawn between themselves and the darkness at the edge of the woods. The church, which had once been the heart of the town, saw its pews empty week by week, the hymns echoing off stone walls to a congregation thinned by doubt and shame. The sheriff's office, long a symbol of order, became a place of uneasy glances and unfinished reports, the weight of years of neglect pressing down on every desk. Some tried to move on, to let the past sink beneath the surface of daily life. But the land would not allow it. The quiet cut along the new bypass remained a place where birds refused to sing, where the grass grew in patchy, uneven tufts, and where, on certain mornings, a low mist would curl above the ground, refusing to lift until the sun was high. Children, warned away from the area, would sometimes return home pale and silent, unable or unwilling to describe what they had seen among the trees. The process of redefining the community was slow and painful. New families arrived, drawn by cheap land and the promise of a fresh start. But they found themselves haunted by stories they could not quite understand. Old families, their roots deep in the soil, struggled to reconcile the pride they felt in their heritage with the horror that had been unearthed. The town's identity, once so certain, became a shifting thing, shaped as much by what had been lost as by what remained. In the years that followed, the Merryweather name faded from official records, but it lingered in the margins on the lips of the old, in the cautionary tales told around campfires, in the nervous glances exchanged when the wind rose at dusk. The land itself bore the scars of what had happened, the trees along the ridge growing in twisted, unnatural patterns, the creek running slower, its waters tinged with the memory of secrets too heavy to carry. But the most enduring legacy was not in the land or the records, but in the minds of those who remained. The story of the Merryweathers became a kind of inheritance, passed down not through blood, but through fear and fascination. Children grew up hearing warnings about the woods, about the dangers of curiosity, about the price of silence. Some dismissed the tales as superstition, the relics of an older, darker time. Others listened more closely, sensing the truth that lay beneath the surface. The fate of those most closely tied to the events remained shrouded in uncertainty. The bones unearthed beneath the bypass were never claimed, their identities never confirmed. The letters signed M. Merryweather ceased as abruptly as they had begun, leaving behind only questions. The photograph of the two boys, preserved under glass in the county archives, became an object of fascination for researchers and folklorists. Its origins debated but never resolved. Some claimed to have seen the boys themselves, pale, barefoot, moving in perfect unison along the edge of the woods, their faces turned away from the light. Historians note that the story's power lies not in its resolution, but in its persistence. The unanswered questions, the lingering doubts, the sense that something remains unfinished, these are the true legacy of the Merryweather case. The community, for all its efforts to move forward, found itself haunted by echoes it could not silence. The past, it seemed, was not content to remain buried. In the quiet hours before dawn, when the mist clings to the ground and the world holds its breath, the land remembers. The scars are not always visible, but they are felt in the hush that falls over the hollow, in the reluctance of birds to sing, in the uneasy dreams of those who live nearby. The story endures, not as a warning, but as a question. What price do we pay for the secrets we keep? What wounds do we inflict when we choose silence over truth? The final reckoning is not found in courtrooms or archives, but in the hearts of those who inherit the story. The contrast between what was believed and what was revealed, between the comfort of ignorance and the pain of knowledge, is stark. The community, once bound by a shared silence, is now divided by a shared memory, a memory that refuses to fade, that demands to be acknowledged, that shapes the lives of those who come after. And so, the story of the Merryweathers lingers, a shadow at the edge of the woods, a whisper in the dark. The evidence remains: bones sealed in boxes, letters filed away, photographs gathering dust. But the true legacy is less tangible, more insidious, a sense of unease, a reluctance to look too closely, a fear that some questions are better left unanswered. Yet, even as the years pass and the world changes, the land does not forget. The spiral, once hidden, now lies exposed, a reminder that the past is never truly past, that the choices we make echo through generations, that the silence we keep can become a curse. The story ends, but the questions remain. In the end, perhaps that is the only justice to be found: the knowledge that some secrets cannot be buried, that some wounds never heal, and that the echoes of the past will always find a way to be heard. So, if you ever find yourself walking the old roads near Hollow Ridge and the mist begins to rise, ask yourself, what would you do if you stumbled upon a photograph that should not exist? Would you keep it, or would you burn it? And if you listen closely, in the hush between heartbeats, you might just hear the echo of a story that refuses to die, a story that waits, patient and unblinking, for someone brave enough to ask the right question.